They said Colt Brennan was a coward, a man who kept his head down, avoided trouble, and never dared to raise his voice, let alone his fists. But that lie shattered the moment Magnus Whitmore hit the floor of the Dusty Dollar Saloon with blood dripping from his split lip and a stunned gasp caught in his throat. The saloon froze. Whiskey glasses trembled in mid-air. Cards hung still in the hands of gamblers. Conversations died mid-sentence, and every eye turned to the man standing over the fallen rancher. Colt's knuckles were raw, his chest heaving like a hunted animal trapped in a cage. His breath came sharp, uneven. For a moment, no one said a word. The air was thick with disbelief, tension, and something else. Something far more dangerous. Because Magnus Whitmore wasn't just another drunk rancher. He was the man who owned half the land this town sat on. He controlled the water rights. He employed more cowboys than the sheriff had bullets. And he had a son named Thorne Whitmore. And that name? That name alone was enough to make the rowdiest outlaws sit straight and speak soft. Colt stood motionless, his hand trembling as it hovered near the Colt .45 at his side. He didn't want to fight. Not like this. But you don't land a punch like that and walk away clean. Not when it's Magnus Whitmore on the ground. His silver hair dusted with sawdust, and his pride bleeding out faster than the cut on his lip, all over $23. The kind of debt most men would forget. But not Magnus. And not today. If you had been in that saloon just a few feet away watching it all unfold, what would you have done? Would you have backed Colt? Or pressed yourself against the wall like everyone else, frozen in fear? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one of them. Magnus Whitmore wiped blood from his mouth, struggling to his feet with the help of a nearby chair. His breath came in ragged wheezes, but his voice still carried the weight of a man who had never known fear. "You just made the biggest mistake of your miserable life, boy," he hissed, spitting red onto the sawdust-covered floor. "My son Thorne is riding back from Millfield today. When he sees what you've done to me, you won't have a hole deep enough to crawl into." Colt's stomach sank like a stone. The name alone, Thorne Whitmore, was enough to drain the color from a man's face. He wasn't just the son of a powerful land baron. He was a warhorse in human skin, the kind of man who once hanged 3 cattle rustlers from the same tree just to prove a point. He didn't ask questions. He didn't make threats. He simply rode in and cleaned house. Magnus leaned on the bar, eyes gleaming with cold satisfaction. He's got 50 men with him, all loyal, all armed. And they'll ride through this town like Judgment Day come early. At that moment, the saloon door burst open with a sharp creak. A young boy stumbled inside, face flushed, chest heaving. "Mr. Whitmore," he gasped, voice cracking with urgency. "Your son, he's coming. I saw the dust cloud. 50 riders, maybe more. They're headed straight for us." The room erupted in whispers. Chairs scraped. Boots shifted. Patrons pressed themselves against walls like shadows trying to disappear. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. Colt's pulse thundered in his ears. He backed slowly toward the rear exit, his eyes darting to the dark alley behind the saloon. Shadow's black stallion was tied just a few feet beyond that door. Fast. Maybe fast enough. But even the best horse couldn't outrun a small army with rifles and a blood debt to settle. He glanced back at Magnus, who was now straightening his blood-stained vest with a cruel smile. "Run if you want," the old man sneered. "Makes no difference. My son don't negotiate. He don't forgive. He solves problems." Through the dusty window, Colt could already see the cloud forming on the horizon. Not a storm, but something worse. Dust kicked up by hooves, organized, disciplined. Riders in formation like soldiers, not ranch hands. They moved with purpose, like a pack of wolves that had caught the scent of their prey. Every beat of hoof, against dry earth, echoed like a war drum in Colt's chest. His hands trembled not from fear, but from instinct, fight or flee. His body remembered how to survive, even if his mind hadn't caught up yet. And suddenly, the boy's words rang louder in his memory. 50 riders, fast. This wasn't justice. This was execution. What would you do in Colt's place? Saddle up and ride like hell? Or stay, dig your heels in, and face the devil head on? Drop your answer in the comments. Things are about to explode, and I want to know what kind of person you'd be when the guns start talking. Colt's hand froze on the back door handle. The growing rumble of hooves outside felt distant now, muffled by the sudden pounding in his chest. Then came the words that turned his blood to ice. "Oh, and Brennan," Magnus said, voice thick with venom. "My boy knows all about Redemption Creek. He knows exactly who you really are." The name hit harder than any fist ever could. Redemption Creek. A forgotten place drenched in blood and regret. A town that didn't appear on most maps anymore. Colt's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the floorboards, like they might offer a way to disappear. Magnus saw the reaction and smiled through cracked lips, the kind of smile only a man with poison in his heart could wear. "That's right, boy. You thought you could grow a beard, change your name, and bury the past. But my son Thorne's been tracking men like you for years. He knows everything about the Hartwell gang, about Sheriff Coleman and his deputies, about what you did." A hush fell over the room again. Even the whispers died. Colt didn't move. He didn't speak. But the silence said enough. The truth had already arrived, whether he acknowledged it or not. Cole Hartwell. The name felt foreign in his mouth now, like a ghost trying to wear a man's skin. But once, it had been feared across 3 territories. A name that rode with outlaws, took what it wanted, and left bodies in its wake. A name tied to robbery, ambush, and 5 dead federal officers in a town that no longer dared speak of the massacre. "I ain't that man anymore," Colt said quietly, but the words sounded hollow, even to him. The past doesn't forgive. It doesn't forget. It waits. Patient, relentless, like a hound with your scent. Magnus leaned forward, voice low and cutting. "Tell that to Sheriff Coleman's widow, to his 3 kids who still wait by the window every night. You think changing your name makes you clean, makes you less a murderer." The weight of memory pressed down on Colt's shoulders, heavier than any saddle he'd carried. Faces he tried to forget rose from the depths of his conscience. Voices, screams, gunshots in the dark. His fingers twitched, not toward his weapon, but out of habit coasts of actions long past. He had run. For years, he had fled across state lines, through dust and blizzards and empty canyons. He had traded violence for silence, gunfire for back-breaking ranch work, but no amount of sweat could wash away blood. "I made mistakes," Colt said at last, voice steady but distant. "Terrible ones, but I didn't kill those lawmen." Magnus scoffed. "Sure, they just fell over dead while your gang rode off with the gold." Colt's eyes lifted. There was something behind them now. Not defiance, not anger, something colder, sadder, a kind of grief that had calcified into stone over time. "You don't know what happened," he said. "Don't need to," Magnus replied. "My son does, and he's almost here." Outside, the hoofbeats were louder now, echoing like judgment. Colt's past was no longer chasing him. It had caught up, and it was riding through the front gate. The saloon doors slammed open with a force that shook dust from the rafters. Spurs clinked in perfect rhythm. The room seemed to shrink. Thorne Whitmore stood framed in the doorway, his long coat trailing behind him, his eyes cold and unforgiving. The air shifted as his boots touched the wooden floor. He moved with the stillness of a storm right before it breaks, Behind him, a wall of men poured into the saloon, rifles ready, formation tight. They didn't need orders. They already knew what this was. An execution. Thorne's gaze found his father first. Magnus stood leaning against the bar, blood still drying on his lip, his posture proud despite the pain. He pointed a trembling finger at Colt. "That yellow dog right there laid hands on me. Over $23, in front of everyone. Disgraced the Whitmore name." Thorne turned his attention to Colt. The shift was slow, deliberate, like a predator locking onto its prey. His expression didn't change. He didn't need to shout. His silence was more dangerous than a raised voice. "Is that true?" he asked, low and calm. Colt didn't reach for his gun. Not yet. Not with 20 rifles pointed at his chest. Instead, he raised both hands slowly, showing empty palm. "I paid your father," he said, voice steady. 2 weeks ago, in cash, right into his hand. He tore up the receipt and called me a thief when I tried to prove it." The room held its breath. "You calling my pa a liar?" Thorne asked. No anger in his tone, just that same cold stillness, but something flickered behind his eyes. "I'm calling him a man who made a mistake," Colt answered. Magnus barked a bitter laugh. "Liar. Forged the damn receipt. Tried to make me look the fool." "Shut up, Pa," Thorne said. The words were quiet, but they cracked like thunder. Silence fell. Colt reached slowly into his vest. Every eye followed the movement. The air thickened. Fingers tensed around triggers. The weight of 20 hammers cocking back filled the room like thunder behind a closed door. "He's going for his gun," Magnus yelled. "Stop," Thorne ordered, his hand raised high. "Nobody fires. Not until I see what he's holding." Colt's hand came out holding not a weapon, but several torn scraps of paper. He stepped forward and laid them carefully on the bar. The fluttering sound of the paper settling on wood was louder than the wind outside. Thorne walked over. One step, then another. Boots heavy against the boards. He picked up the pieces and turned them over in his hand, fitting them together like parts of a broken truth. The bar grew so quiet, you could hear the creak of old floorboards as he moved. A bank stamp, a date, a signature, his father's plank. "This is from the First National Bank," Thorne said quietly. "Receipt dated 2 weeks ago. $23. Payment in full. Your signature, Pa." Magnus's face went pale. "Number, that ain't right. I don't remember." "You took his money," Thorne cut in. "You took it. Then you asked for it again. And when he tried to defend himself, you grabbed him in front of the entire town." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunfight. Colt didn't speak. He didn't need to. The truth was now laid bare, piece by piece, for everyone to see. You could feel the saloon shift, like the weight of the moment had finally tipped. But Thorne's eyes didn't soften. They hardened. "You may have paid," he said. "You may have been wronged, but you still laid hands on my father. And that means something in this town." Colt held his ground. No apology, no fear. Just the quiet strength of a man who had stopped running. The next words from Thorne would decide everything. Would justice mean blood, or something else? And for those of you watching, I want to hear from you. If you were in Thorne's boots, what would you do? Would you punish Colt for laying hands on your father? Or would you forgive a man who was only defending himself against a lie? Let me know in the comments. Things are about to take another turn. The moment hung still, heavy as a storm about to break. Thorne stood with the torn receipt in hand, the truth between his fingers. His father silent, the saloon frozen. Colt Brennan, or Cole Hartwell, remained where he stood, hands lowered but not relaxed. The rifles hadn't dropped, and the danger hadn't passed. Then came the sound of hooves. New ones, sharper, faster, from the east. Another dust cloud. Before anyone could speak, the saloon doors creaked again. This time, no wind, no drama. just the sound of authority entering the room. A tall man in a black coat stepped in, a silver badge catching the lantern light across his chest like a dagger. Marshal Wade Kellerman. His reputation rode in ahead of him, legendary lawman, relentless hunter of outlaws. He had brought down entire gangs, tracked fugitives across 3 territories, and never once returned empty-handed. His eyes locked on Colt immediately. "Well, well," Kellerman said, voice cold and certain. "Colt Brennan, or should I say Cole Hartwell, you've led us quite a chase." Gasps rippled through the saloon. Even Thorne's men shifted uneasily. The name Hartwell still carried weight, and now it came with a federal warrant. Sheriff Daniels slipped in behind the marshal, visibly nervous. He held a folded piece of paper like it might burn through his hands. "Marshal Kellerman has a warrant," Daniels stammered. "Multiple charges, murder, robbery, and the killing of federal agents." You could feel it. The mood turned again. This wasn't just town law anymore. This was federal, and it carried the weight of a rope already hanging. Magnus, finally finding his voice, sneered. "See? Told you he was no good. Beat an old man, and turns out he's a killer too." Colt didn't flinch, but he didn't reach for his gun either. Not yet. Instead, he took a slow breath, then spoke, calm and clear. "Kellerman," he said, "you want to tell them the whole truth, or just the parts that keep you clean?" The marshal narrowed his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do," Colt said, stepping forward. "Tell them about the gold shipment. Tell them how only one lawman knew the exact route. Tell them how 3 agents died, and somehow you walked away clean." "That's enough," Kellerman snapped, his hand drifting toward his holster. But Colt didn't stop. "Tell them how you promised safe passage to the Hartwell gang in exchange for a cut, and when the feds found out, you killed them. Then you made me the scapegoat." The room went deathly quiet. Kellerman's jaw tightened. No one's going to believe a fugitive over a federal marshal. "Maybe not," Colt said, reaching slowly into his other vest pocket. "But they might believe this." He pulled out a small leather-bound journal and tossed it toward Thorne, who caught it with one hand. The room didn't breathe. "What's this?" Thorne asked. "The Journal of Agent Morrison," Colt said. "He was one of the 3 agents murdered in Redemption Creek. He didn't trust Kellerman. He wrote everything down." Thorne flipped it open. Inside were pages of tight handwriting. Meeting dates, names, routes, a full log of conversations between Kellerman and the Hartwell gang. Magnus paled. Daniels took a step back. Even Kellerman's lips parted as the color drained from his face. "You son of a—" Kellerman began, but Thorne cut him off. "Is this true?" he asked, voice low. Kellerman didn't answer. His eyes darted to Colt, then to the journal, then back to his holster. "You're not walking out of here with that," Kellerman said. He drew. Colt moved faster. The gunfire cracked like thunder. One shot. When the smoke cleared, Kellerman lay on the floor, blood pooling beneath him, his pistol still clutched in a lifeless hand. Colt stood with his Colt .45 extended, a thin wisp of smoke trailing from the barrel. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Thorne held the journal tighter, his eyes never leaving the pages. After a long moment, he spoke, quiet but clear. "You weren't the killer. You were the one trying to stop it." Colt holstered his weapon. His hand was trembling, from adrenaline, from years of carrying truth alone, from the memory of Morrison, gunned down by someone he had trusted. Sheriff Daniels finally broke the silence. "But the reports, they all said—" "They were Kellerman's reports," Colt said. "He wrote the story. I was just the last man standing." Thorne looked around the room. No one argued. No one doubted. The truth had found its way home. And if you didn't see that twist coming, you're not alone. If this moment hit you like it hit me, drop a comment with the word "Whoa" so I know you're still riding with me. Because this story isn't over yet, not by a long shot. The saloon had never been quieter. Kellerman's body had been carried out. The guns were lowered. The tension that once hung in the air like smoke now drifted away with each passing second, replaced by something heavier but more honest relief. Thorne Whitmore stood at the center of the room, the journal of Agent Morrison still in his hands. He closed it carefully, like it was something sacred, then turned to Sheriff Daniels. "Send a telegram to the federal marshal's office," he said. "Let them know Kellerman is dead, and tell them why." Daniels nodded, already reaching for his notebook. "Make sure they know Cole Hartwell was never the traitor. He was the witness, the one man who didn't run from the truth." Colt stood nearby, silent, listening but not speaking. It felt surreal. For years, he had lived in the shadows of lies. Now, in the span of a few moments, the truth had been dragged into the light and with it. His name, Magnus, still leaning against the bar, looked older than he had before. The arrogance had drained from his face. Now there was only weariness, and something else, regret. He stepped forward, slow and stiff, until he stood a few feet from Colt. "I was wrong," he said. The words sounded rusty, like they hadn't been used in a long time. "I remember now. You did pay. I took your money. I just forgot. The doctor said my memory hasn't been right since the fall off that horse." He hesitated, then added, "What I said, what I did. It wasn't fair. You didn't deserve any of it." Colt looked at the man who had almost gotten him killed and saw no malice anymore. Just a confused, broken father who let pride and failing memory make enemies out of innocent men. "We all make mistakes," Colt said, his voice calm. "The difference is owning them." Magnus nodded slowly, then stepped back. Thorne came over next, his tone firm but quieter than before. "You're free," he said. "Your name will be cleared. The marshals will read that journal, and when they do, you won't be hunted anymore." Colt gave a faint smile. It wasn't joy, not quite. More like the first deep breath after coming up from underwater. "Appreciate that," he said, "but I can't stay." "Where will you go?" "North," Colt replied. "Colorado's hiring lawmen. They need people who know how to track the ones that don't play fair." Thorne raised an eyebrow. From outlaw to lawman, Morrison would have liked that. Colt nodded. "He would have. I owe him that much." They shook hands, two men who had stood on opposite ends of a barrel just minutes ago, now finding something close to mutual respect. Outside, the wind had shifted. The dust was clearing. Townsfolk slowly emerged from corners, from silence, returning to life. And Colt Brennan, or rather Cole Hartwell, walked out into that new day with something he hadn't had in years. A name that belonged to him, a future that didn't run from the past, and for the first time in a long, long while, peace. The sun was setting over the western ridge, casting long shadows across the dirt road that led out of town. The sky burned with streaks of gold and blood red, the kind of sky that marked an ending but also a beginning. Colt stood outside the Dusty Dollar Saloon, adjusting the saddle on his black stallion, Shadow. He wasn't in a hurry. For the first time in years, there was no one chasing him, no weight pressing down on his shoulders, no lies to outrun. He was no longer Colt Brennan, the coward cowboy. He was Cole Hartwell again, the man he used to be, or maybe the man he was always meant to become. Thorne stepped out onto the porch behind him, arms crossed, watching in silence. "You sure about Colorado?" he asked. Cole gave a quiet nod. "They're hiring lawmen up there," he said. "Real ones, not the kind that hide behind badges and lies." Thorne didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Think you'll be good at it?" Cole looked down the road, then back at him. "I used to be hunted," he said. "Now I'll be the one doing the hunting." He paused. "The world used to need men like me to disappear. Now it needs someone who knows how the dark works so they can stand in front of it." He mounted his horse, and tipped his hat. A gesture of farewell, of peace, of something earned. Thorne gave a slow nod, not of goodbye, but of understanding. And then Cole rode off, the fading light catching the edges of his coat, his silhouette blending into the open road. No longer running, no longer hiding. A man with nothing left to prove but everything still ahead of him. Because the world once needed a man to vanish. Now, it needed someone to protect it. If you believe Cole Hartwell earned his second chance, leave a comment to let me know. And if you want to hear more stories like Hesoff Redemption, Justice, and The Road in Between, make sure to subscribe. This journey isn't over, it's just getting started.